Hallo und herzlich willkommen zu einer weiteren Folge Chaos at Noah. Ich muss davor vorneweg schon mal sagen, ich hatte eigentlich schon 3 weitere Folgen aufgenommen, doch irgendwie waren die Dateien so dermaßen kaputt, dass glücklicherweise habe ich mir ja angewöhnt, Speicherstände zu machen und die nicht einfach zu überschreiben, dass ich jetzt an dem Punkt halt wieder zurückgesprungen bin, ich, wo ich nach der letzten heilen Aufnahme war. Und ich schaue jetzt einfach mal, ob er diese Folge vernünftig durchbekommt oder nicht. Weil je nachdem, wenn er das jetzt diesmal auch hier nicht klappt, dann muss ich nämlich mein Setup ein bisschen umbauen. Daher, hey, vielleicht klappt es ja. Ich hoffe es einfach mal. Ich, sorry, ich weiß gerade nicht mehr, was genau, an welchem Punkt wir jetzt genau sind. Dadurch, dass ich halt schon 3 Folgen eigentlich aufgenommen hatte. Also, wir waren auf jeden Fall nach dem Konzert. Das weiß ich. Aber wo genau... Sorry, kann ich gerade nicht mehr sagen. Late Night Shibuya 7 a.m. 4 a.m. Despite being named the city that never sleeps, very few people were currently present at its most popular local Scramble Crossing. Ah, jetzt weiß ich wieder, wo wir sind, also was jetzt passieren wird. Instead, many taxis were parked in their place, ready to carry away the drunks, unwilling to wait for the first train in the morning. A generous amount of the drivers were reclined in their seats, napping. The more diligent drivers leaned against the steering wheels as their eyes stared idly towards the hotspots. The most frequent ones being Center Guy and the 107 building, also 107 building. However, they were not trying to ascertain whether or not any of the passers-by were potential customers. Instead, they focused intently on the movements of the sanitation workers who had arrived about 30 minutes before. The 5 to 6 men were thought to be sanitation workers due to their yellow armbands, each of which had sanitation reporter written on them. It was very likely that without the armbands, no one would have recognized them as such, for there was something particularly odd about the men. They were all wearing black suits. Furthermore, ever since their arrival, they had yet to show any signs of cleaning at all. Instead, one man had a strange instrument resembling a pendulum, and the surrounding men appeared to be measuring something. This was not restricted to just the one area, however. From the center of Scramble Crossing to the very edge of it, they left no spot untouched, writing all their findings down on various scraps of paper. Even now, they were taking measurements from directly beneath the traffic signals, silently observing the movement of the pendulum. At last, the instrument let out a small chime.
地点 L2 の8 0.62 メガ GE ハイスコアです。
先月より38ポイントもアップか。思った通りだ。
But there was no one present in the early morning Shibuya to pay attention to the odd mumbling and behavior. The taxi drivers would speed off as soon as patrons boarded their cars, quickly forgetting about the mysterious sanitation workers. The drunks were hardly conscious, leaving them unable to see anything around them to begin with. Female nightlife workers who had just clocked out, finally free from the stress of smiling at repulsive drunkards, jumped into taxis to get home as soon as possible. Thus, not a single person was around to notice that the government had not scheduled any plans whatsoever for cleaning to take place that morning. Even after the weekend had passed, the uproar brought on by the 4th Nugent case, now dubbed the vampire incident, hadn't even come close to calming down. A man's corpse had been found with all of its blood taken out of it, leaving the surface of the body a sickly inhuman shade of green. It had been discovered in the bathroom at Shibuya Station, a part of the Inokashira line. In addition, it was uncovered that a photograph of the corpse had been posted to an online auction, and considering the abnormality and brutality of the murder, it was inevitable that both the mass media and Ed Channel jumped on it. Special attention had been paid to the headline of the auction page, which read Type B blood in short supply. Tissue packs advertising an upcoming blood drive had been handed out in large quantities in front of Shibuya Station a few days prior to the incident, and the exact same message had been written on them. I had one of those tissue packs on hand. Reading back over it again now, the insanely strange words didn't read like an ad for a blood drive anymore. They read like some kind of advanced message of the crime. The police had supposedly been searching for the part-timers handing out tissue packs, but they had yet to find any of them. However, there was one area where the vampire differed pretty heavily from the previous cases. While there had already been elements of it in the crucifixion case, the intent for it to be a theatrical crime was much more obvious with this one. A few media outlets had begun clamoring for increased police presence via patrols, or for a late-night curfew for people under 18. But the number of young people visiting the city showed no signs of declining. They were just as packed as usual, with people flooding every nook and cranny of Center Guy and Scramble Crossing. The internet was so thirsty for news, a group of people trying to be Snake had snuck into Shibuya late at night to post live updates, and there had also been a phrase that was trending among the city's younger population: whose eyes are those eyes? It wasn't just online either. That phrase had penetrated the ranks of each and every Dushin Dikuan working around Shibuya. On Etchin, it had become common practice to tag the phrase onto anything regardless if it was related or not. This week's episode of Bloodtune won't have much Sheraton whose eyes are those eyes. The new patch weapons are so weak, they are actually unusable. Whose eyes are those eyes? Ich finde es eigentlich dämlich, das immer überall dran zu hängen oder davor zu packen. But whose eyes are those eyes is that from? Oder sowas. And so on. To people my age, New Gen was probably just something new and exciting to follow. The newest shit show to obsess over. But to me it was the most aggravating thing possible. Regardless, a whole 3 days had passed since the vampire's case, so I had been able to calm down a little. Of course, there was still a nagging uneasiness in the corner of my mind. But by losing myself in ESO over the weekend, I had been able to temporarily forget about all that irritating, inexplicable garbage. Even though I had to go to school today, I had been able to get through my classes by either sleeping through them or thinking about the stats and frame data of ESO's rarest items. I guess I had leveled up a bit. And so, on my way home from school, I stopped by Ed Cafe for the first time in a while. It made me happy to see that the room I usually used, room 37, was vacant and ready for me. The last time I had set foot in it was at least 2 weeks ago, meaning that this was the longest gap I'd ever had between visits. The sour breeze flowing from the air conditioning, the manga stained with the smell of tobacco, how comfortable it was to sit back in the recliner. The snores of old men cutting through the silent, still air. It all provided the store's interior with an aura of pure nostalgia.
ルーム37の PC のチャットログを調べさせてもらいました。そこから分かったこと。あなた一人の自作自演。将軍はあなた自身。
hadn't seen you since then. We were in different grades, and I didn't go to school as that often. So it made sense why we hadn't come across each other.
ユアの妄想はすごいよ。
I couldn't help but pity her, sagt der Richtige. She was clearly sick in the head. I would be better off just leaving her be. Besides, meeting her at all had been a freak accident. Over the past 2 weeks or so, I had been dragged into all sorts of random bullshit. Before then, my everyday life had been completely vanilla, and Misumi-kun was pretty much the only one who had talked to me. So why was it that basically nothing but weird, inexplicable bullshit had been happening to me recently? I wanted to avoid thinking about that garbage as much as humanly possible. Da habe ich doch irgendwie... I wanted to avoid thinking about the dying message had to be just a coincidence. The words were all pretty common after all. If I had thought of it, there was no reason someone else wouldn't have been able to as well. I had no interest in who that message was aimed at. No, I couldn't be interested. That wasn't what I told myself anyhow. Suddenly something started ringing nearby. I jolted up in surprise, and a shudder ran through me as I stayed rooted in my recliner. It was the sound of phone ringing, but whose was it? Because the store was so quiet, the electronic sound rang out all the louder. I looked around, but I couldn't locate the phone anywhere.
もしかして。
Yep. A thought came to my mind, and I fished around in my bag. Sure enough, the ringing was coming from the cell phone I had brought just a few days prior. I glanced warily at the LCD display. Normally the caller's name would be displayed there. Was it a good idea to answer? I didn't like talking to people that much, so probably not. Who was calling me anyway? Ich mag das Design, das habe ich beim letzten Mal auch schon gesagt, wo ich die Aufnahme hier hatte. Also das Hintergrunddesign hier. I hadn't told anyone my phone number yet. The only people who knew it even existed were my family, with Nanami's noisy ass making sure to put them in my address book. When one of the people registered in my address book called, the name should display, meaning that whoever was calling wasn't a family member. So, who was this? The phone kept on ringing persistently. Did people who had phones usually force people to listen to the ringing for this long? I had never used one of them before, so I wouldn't know, but it was incredibly annoying. To suddenly invade someone's privacy like this, cursing them with an obnoxious ringing until they pick up. A socially acceptable way to invade someone's privacy. That was exactly why I didn't want one of these stupid things. Oh, it had stopped. Relieved, I checked the screen again. Missed calls 1 was displayed on it. I had no interest in returning this random's call, so I decided to leave it be. It would be a pain in the ass if this happened again in the future, so I should really figure out how to set up my voicemail. Oof, cell phones were such a pain in the ass. I didn't even like phones to begin with. I mean, come on, they were freaky as hell. How exactly were you supposed to know if the person you were talking to on the other end was the actual person you thought it was? With how prevalent fraud was nowadays, were people actually taking the proper measures to make sure they were talking to the right person? I couldn't help but wonder how people would be able to calmly have a conversation with someone who might be an impersonator. Even if I understood the gist of how it worked, it was hard to believe that my voice could somehow reach distant places through a phone line. When you talk on the phone, your voice is temporarily converted into electrical signals. They pass through the phone lines until they reach the recipient, where they are then restored back to normal. That's when they become audible. Das ist so ein bisschen eine Thematik, die auch in Occultic 9 aufgegriffen wird. In order to talk to her on the phone, you need to go through this conversation process at least twice. With a cell phone, your voice is first converted into electrical signals. Then it travels to a nearby base station via radio waves, which then run through normal phone lines to the switching station, then to the closest base station to the recipient, before finally arriving at their cell phone right afterward. It was a bizarre, complicated process. If my voice was replaced by electrical signals, could the other party really hear my voice word for word exactly as I had sent it? In fact, wasn't it possible that in the conversion process, my voice and my words could be transformed into something completely different? For instance, if I called Nanami, but instead of connecting to her, it connected to some strange, shady facility. And there, I would end up talking to someone I'd never met, who was only pretending to be Nanami. Maybe there wouldn't even be a person, but a computer instead. That was the big reason why phone calls freaked me out so much. They were even scarier than talking to someone face to face. When I had logged into ESO as Lieselotte, as was often the case, 3 hours passed by in the blink of an eye. It had been 2 weeks since I'd last used her, but she made for pretty good support, so I was feeling pretty satisfied. I left Ed Cafe in a good mood and started heading home. Center Guy was packed and noisy as usual, which irritated me. The bright lights illuminating the streets from the various shops made it hard to believe it was nighttime. And at the end of the well-lit road, despite the crowds, I clearly saw her, causing me to stop dead in my tracks. That one girl. Okay, und gleich an dem Punkt ist meine erste Aufnahme kaputt gegangen. Hier hatte meine Aufnahme einen Schaden bekommen. In the midst of so many people, she glared directly at me. Right smack in the middle of Center Guy, where people were coming and going, without reprieve, where it was difficult to even walk straight. She stood still, resting the gigantic sword she carried on her shoulder. The spectacle was completely absurd, and yet no one paid her sword any mind. The stream of people flowed right past her with no change in the manner. She was the girl I had seen at 7:00. Das war da, wo er mit Nanami das Handy kaufen war, wo er kurz rausgegangen ist, bis sie ihn wieder zurückgezerrt hat. She had been there when Nanami was dragging me around to buy a cell phone. Okay, sagt er selber nochmal. Da hatte ich so gerade nicht mal im Kopf gehabt. The shape of her sword, her sumo uniform, her long black hair, everything matched perfectly. Back then she had been standing at the top of the stairs in front of 107, watching the passers-by come and go. And I remembered the sharpness of her glare. I had met her once before, at school. She had these almond-shaped eyes and clean-cut model-like features, and yet they only served to make her seem all the more unapproachable, and it was all kept off by that long, silky black hair that stretched all the way down to her waist. Das ist übrigens das 3. Mal, dass wir so ein Schwert jetzt sehen. Das erste war ganz am Anfang, sozusagen im Prolog. Und da hat die Story noch nicht angefangen. Das zweite war auf dem Konzert. Haben wir das zweite Schwert gesehen und jetzt sehen wir das 3. Schwert. She was Girl B, the one who was so rudely propped me in the corridors after school one day, asking me who I was. Come to think of it, why was she glaring at me? Thinking maybe it wasn't me she was looking at, I turned around. Usually when something like this happened, more often than not, they were just looking at someone who happened to be behind me, but that wasn't the case here. The one she was glaring at, her gaze filled with intense hostility, had to be me. I froze. I knew now what it felt like to be someone's prey. Glaring back was out of the question. I was always terrible at looking people in the eye, so I couldn't help but stare down at the pavement. I should run. Normally, I would go home by taking a left at Scramble Crossing, where she was standing, and then I would end up next to Bookfat. But today I headed for the station instead. There were a lot of people there, but I would rather I would have rather that than deal with some scary 3D girl harassing me. Hey, she might even try to mug me. Ich find sie cool. Or maybe she was only feigning being alone, and she actually had several Dreadicuz lurking nearby, waiting for her to lure me in, so they could beat the shit out of me. To be honest, they would probably one-shot me. Das heißt, mit einem Schlag umhauen. Like I would fall for that. I swiveled to the right, only to caught completely off guard.
Oh.
Huh? Somehow, the girl was right in front of me. Flustered, I turned back around to look at Scramble Crossing. She was no longer there. I looked in front of me once again. The girl with the sword was still glaring at me, just as she had been before. What the hell? When did she get around me? Legs could only move so fast. That was practically teleportation, and besides, how could she have predicted that I would turn around in the first place?
Oi.
Her voice reached my ears, and with extreme clarity. I frantically looked around me. I wanted to think she was talking to someone else, even though I already knew full well who she was talking to. I searched for anyone else who she could be directing that hey you to what. But obviously there was no one. A number of businessmen walking by glanced at Girlby inquisitively, only to realize she wasn't talking to them, and walked away. Girlby, who had been standing there imposingly the entire time, took a sudden step toward me. That was all the confirmation I needed. Girlby had been targeting me after all. Do you see it? Was könnte wohl mit it gemeint sein in diesem Bild? Rude as ever. In my 17 years life, I could probably count the number of times a girl had talked to me like this on one hand. Well, I guess there were times when Kirimiya Tsubaki Akatsunko had talked to me like that, but it was in a besondere kind of way. Da war ich bei der Aufnahme etwas irritiert, was es mit der zu tun hatte, weil mir der Name nichts gesagt hat. Die Erklärung kommt jetzt. Granted, Tsunko was just a 2D character from the Eroge Tell Me doll. Deshalb war ich irritiert. Das erklärte mich, warum ich mit dem Namen nichts anfangen konnte. Girlby kept getting closer and closer as those stupid thoughts raced through my head. Why does she feel so intimidating even though she's a girl, I wondered. But the reasons were simple. The sharp look in her eyes and the gigantic sword she was carrying. For a sword, it had a fairly unique shape. It was the kind of thing that operated on anime logic. It had an awesome design, but if you actually used it in real life, it would be completely unusable. It had to be from some mecha anime. Had there been any mecha anime that had started airing recently? Even though I knew it was a prop for some random anime cosplay, it still looked incredibly sharp and solid. Like if you even so much as touched it, it would slice your fingers clean off. What a strange thought. Girlby had already cut the distance between us by 2 meters. If she swung her sword, it would hit me. Flustered, I took a step back, but it was too late. Girlby closed the distance further and further. Delusion time! Das ist schon eine ganz spezielle Delusion, die jetzt reinkickt. She had actually swung the sword. Cowering on the spot, I covered my head. I hadn't dodged it. If I hadn't dodged it, it would have hit my head for sure. I doubted it would have cut me, but with that kind of force behind it, it would have given me a concussion and permanently dented my skull. I hated pain. I was so shaken that my speech got all messed up. Und jetzt kickt die Delusion gleich rein. Okay, das Bild finde ich sehr geil, muss ich sagen. Girl B looked down at me coldly. Man, she was really close. Her bare legs were right in front of me. And this angle, I could almost see up her skirt. Jetzt kickt's nämlich rein. You can see it, can't you?
すいません。見てないです。
I phonetically lowered my gaze. Die reden gerade etwas aneinander vorbei. Sie meint was anderes, als was er meint. I knew for a fact she was gonna accuse me of looking at her panties. But I didn't see them, I swear. I almost saw them, but I didn't really. Besides, 3D panties don't get me off anyway. Oof. The only panties I've had to are either 2D or belong to figures. Und Delusion Time. Yippie yay.
嘘だ。絶対見た。さっきからチラチラ見てただろ。
本当に見てない。
And then for some reason I couldn't comprehend, Girl B slipped off one of her shoes, and then she began to take off one of her knee socks. In the midst of this, the area under her skirt threatened to become visible yet again, leaving me at a loss for where to look. I tried to find an opening to escape, but Girl B refused to take her eyes off of me, and she continued removing her sock. Yay! The now barefoot girl assumed an imposing stance, curving her lips in a scornful manner. Zudem kann ich jetzt nur sagen, ey, jedem das seine, aber ich bin der Meinung, der Team sollte sich mal einen Psychologen suchen. Habe ich, glaube ich, schon ein paar Mal gesagt. Naja, wenn man es mag und den dementsprechenden Partner dafür hat, okay, das ist dann seine Sache. Jeder das, was er gerne haben möchte. Suddenly girl B is warm, barefoot, stepped directly on my crotch. Also zumindest solange es legal ist. Es gibt Sachen, wo ich sage, nein, das geht zu weit. Das sind so Sachen, die nicht rechtlich richtig sind. The sudden humiliation rendered me hopelessly embarrassed. The people working around didn't even look at us. Why couldn't there be at least one person who came to my rescue? What a cold society we lived in. Having this happen to me and right smack in the middle of Center Guy, it was mortifying, but I was enjoying it. Okay. The D-Sword. Juhu, und damit haben wir den Namen für die Schwerter. D-Sword. Ich finde die D-Sword so genial. Vielleicht, also, ich denke, die D-Swords sind zumindest ein großer Part, warum ich Chäos Set so genial finde. Das ist bei weitem nicht der einzige Grund, aber ich denke, die D-Swords spielen da schon für mich mit rein. When I came back to myself, I couldn't immediately grasp what was going on, leaving me to blankly stare up at Girl B. She was still wearing her shoes, and she wasn't stepping on my crotch or anything. What the hell, had that been a delusion? So she wasn't trying to accuse me of seeing her panties? At any rate, a D-Sword? And the hell was that? It was the first time I'd ever heard that word. Girl B had said it was a sword, and whatever she was carrying was definitely shaped like a sword, but why was she asking me if I could see it? I decided to just nod. I mean, obviously I could see it. There would be something wrong with me if I couldn't. Lugging around a sword... Oh fuck. Lugging around a sword that large and conspicuous, and in Center Guy no less. I would be willing to accept it if this was Akiba, but in Shibuya, of all places... That? Who? and by who. At the very least, I was definitely here
エ
voluntary.
ラーを見たことがあるか
In Japanese, please. Was what I wanted to say, but unsurprisingly, I wasn't brave enough. Then again, if I said the wrong thing, she would probably stab me, so... Regardless, this chick had been spouting nothing but nonsense ever since she had first opened her mouth.
見たら教えろ
After she said that, girl B turned around, her skirt fluttered in the breeze and I could almost see her panties. I hurriedly shut my eyes.
私は3年の青い瀬名駅前の電車にいる
Ich mag Aoi. Also Sena. Ich finde sie cool. Sena gehört mit zu meinen favorite characters. In Chäos set. Open my eyes. The girl calling herself Sena had vanished. I was completely stunned, and it wasn't until I arrived back at my base that I realized that I hadn't understood a single goddamn word she had said. Und ich würde sagen, an dem Punkt beende ich mal die Folge in der Hoffnung, dass das tatsächlich jetzt die Aufnahme geklappt hat. Vielen Dank fürs Zuschauen und bis zum nächsten Mal. Ciao.